Hello everyone and welcome to the 23rd tutorial in our survival game series. In this one we are going to be taking a look at expanding our level, so importing a lot of different models and assets and taking a look at how the game will actually look. And so I haven't figured out a title for this video yet, but that's what we are going to do. So everything we're going to be using in this video was made by a guy named Samin, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Really cool dude. So I recommend you look him up if you're looking for any kind of nice and free assets on their Facebook page called 7XF Studios, if you're going to type in the URL. And so you can see that he makes really cool looking models, for example this one. And if we just scroll up, you can see that you can just type 7XF space games. So credit to him, and especially considering how young he is. I've also been told that he will model things really cheap. Anyways, moving on the tutorial, that was the crediting shout out part. Now we are gonna get actually get on with it. So let's open up the survival assets pack, which you will need for this unless you're gonna be using your own models, and then go to the import section, and you can see that I have cleaned things up a bit. The one we are gonna be focusing on today is the start area, so that's what we are gonna be making. So you can just go ahead and double click on that to see the different models organized in folders. And so here is a really well done drawing of how the level will kind of look. So keep in mind that I have trained a lot to make this drawing, really. Anyway, so I hope you're enjoying the skills here, but this is how it's gonna look. So basically we're gonna have the spawn here with it's gonna be like a basic camp. So we're gonna have a tent, a campfire, and it's gonna lead down, a road is gonna lead down to the gate, which is gonna allow the player to move on to the next area. And that's not something we're gonna be creating today. We have plenty of things that needs to be done here. And keep in mind, this is just thoughts, so we might not include everything. But I'm thinking that over here we're gonna have some basic enemies to get the player started. Maybe we're gonna make a quest system of some sort, and then the hard enemies are gonna be down by the gate, so that the player will have to level up before he can advance. And so we have a river that runs through, and maybe some kind of boss or hard mob over here, which will drop something more valuable to the player. And then we have a dungeon if we decide to go into a dungeon system at some point. We'll see. But that's just so you have an idea of what we're going to be making. And this video will probably be split up into several parts. But let's see about that. So since this is not perfectly square, I have split it up into two squares. So we're going to be making this terrain first and then focusing on this over here. And that's because if you stretch out the terrain in Unity by changing the resolution, everything you paint will be stretched too, and so things will start looking really weird. So this is just a reference, and now moving on again. So the first thing we're going to be implementing is the Campfire. So this run I really like. And so if we go ahead and click into Campfire folder, we have two textures. We have for the stone base and the actual logs of wood. So that are the two diffuse textures. I'll actually just go ahead and rename that so we don't have the underscores. I just like it that way. And then we have the Campfire Blender file. So if you're using Blender, I recommend you just import using that. And then we have the Campfire FBX if you're not a Blender user, so you can just use that. I'm gonna import this with Blender. If you don't have Blender, again, I recommend you to just download it. It's very useful to have. So drag, as always, I've opened up Unity, and actually before we go ahead and drag it in, let's just make sure that we can see things a little bit better, because now this is set to night by default because of our time of day. And so I think we should change that default value to be daylight. So click on our time of day, and I'll also set down the speed to something like 600. And then we can go under that to our sun, so the sun there, and make sure this is set to pivot up in the corner, not center, because then we're going to be rotating around the moon. So set that to pivot, and then we can just make sure that the sun is at a bit of an angle so it looks cool. Maybe even have the sun come on, so something like that, and like that looks really good. And we can also go ahead and change the time of day amount, so the slider value here, what it starts out with, we can change that to something like 0.4. So now when we play the game, we can see that it's daytime right when we play it. I'm actually gonna do 0.3 instead and see if this is better. Yeah, so like we have the sun rising. We'll do 0.35. So cool. So now that we have a pretty basic setting for that, we can move on with the tutorial. So under our imports there, we are gonna just quickly organize this as it is organized in our imports in the assets pack. So we are gonna split this up into several folders. So create new folder, call this weapons, drag in the yeah, actually let's split this up too. So create new folder, and then make this a sword. Have the sword and the sword texture and drag them in there. New folder, mace. Drag the mace and the UV text under there. And then drag these two folders, the weapons folders, under the weapons folder. So, and let's then make one for the door. So folder, door, and yeah, just go ahead and drag that in there. Perfect. So now let's create, actually let's not create the start area folder yet. Let's just experiment with it there so we don't have to like navigate a million of folders. Now go under the Campfire folder again. I know this is a lot of browsing around, but that's just how it is when you're making level design. And again, this tutorial is made because it has been requested so many times by you guys. So let's take the Campfire, the Logs diffuse, and the Stone Base diffuse, and just drag them into Unity under the Imports folder. You can see it importing, and there we have it. So we can take the Campfire, just maybe take a quick look at some of the settings here. So we have the scale factor set to 1. That might be good. Materials, we want to import them. Normals, import calculate. We have no rig, so go under rig and say none, and hit apply to that. And then under the animations, uncheck import animation. And so we should be good to go. So if we just zoom in on our player here, so we can get closer to the center of our scene. Then we can just take the Campfire and drag it in there. And I don't know about the scale yet. It doesn't seem too bad. But let's actually go ahead and now implement our textures on there. So under the Campfire, you can see it has two objects, a cylinder and a cylinder. And the first one we're just going to rename to Campfire Logs. And the other one is going to be Campfire Base. And select the logs, drag on the logs diffuse, and change the main color to completely white. And then do the same with the Campfire Base. Drag on the Stone Base diffuse and change it to completely white. And now we can see that we have a nice looking fireplace. So let's just drag it in there so we have it standing there. And also let's go ahead and disable these house walls, since we're not really going to be using them for now. And also the lamp, if I can find it there, so disable that. So now it just looks a lot cleaner. And let's take the house piece too and disable that. And this one, the test plate, we can just go ahead and delete that. And so move our player, so select our player. And watch out, whenever you select the player, don't just click on him, because then it will only select the graphics. So when we start moving him, the other parts of the player will stay. So select the entire player, then drag him down, and then drag him over to wherever you want him to be. So let's see how this looks in game. So hit play. And yeah, the shading and the size is nice. It might be a little too big, so we can just select it in the scene. Hit F to center on it. And then you should just be able to scale it down without moving, because the anchor point is set to pivot. So something like that. That might be too small actually. Not too bad. Maybe up a little bit. So, but again, that's something you can set and decide for completely on your own. You could also go ahead and drag this in to make it a prefab, but I'm just gonna let it be for now. Now let's create a new folder in our imports and call this fireplace or campfire. So stick to that and then select the model and the two textures and drag them in. Alright, so moving on. Go to the start area folder in our survival assets. And now let's go and find the one that says maybe tent rig. We'll go with that. And if I just open this up in Blender, you can see what we have going on here. So this is not an actual tent, this is just the rig of it. So like we have the different poles going across and such. So this is just the skeleton. And then we're going to be adding the cloth of this tent later on. And I just thought I wanted to close it off these end pieces, but you can go ahead and delete them. That's why I've made them a separate object. So let's just go ahead and select the tent rig and the tent rig diffuse and drag them into Unity. And Unity will start importing. Now let's select the tent rig. Scale factor set to 1. This is looking good. So let's go under rig, select none, apply. Repeating myself, go to animation, uncheck import animation, hit apply. And there we have it. So we can just go ahead and drag that in also. And the size doesn't seem too bad. Hit F to focus on it. And then let's expand this. And I can see that this cylinder right here, I think we can just go ahead and delete that. Yeah, that's just an empty game object. So the cylinder 003, you can just delete that. That was just made for making it easier to model. Then we can have select the planes here, drag on the tent rig diffuse, change it to white. And so now they share material, which means that whenever we change these plates, it will also change the cylinders here. So I'll just go ahead and delete the planes, but that's completely up to you again. So in another video, we are going to be adding cloth to simulate the effect here so that we can complete our tent. But for now, we're just going to leave the rig. So like that. And let's actually rename the cylinder here to skeleton. Sweet. Now let's move on. So right click, create folder and call this tent. And then just select the tent rig and the tent rig diffuse and drag it on the tent. So save. And let's go back and see what we can implement else. So we have some stones, which we could spread out. We also have a street lamp. So let's go ahead and maybe play around with that. So go under the street lamp folder, select the blend file, select the street lamp cover diffuse, the street lamp and the street lamp glass diffuse. Now drag those into Unity. It will start importing. Select the street lamp model. Uncheck import animation. Why is there even animation? I don't know. Uncheck that. Apply. Rig. None. And we should be good to go. So drag that in. And this is maybe too big. Let's see if we just go over to that. For me, it seems to be way too big. So we can just go ahead and either select it in the project pane and scale it down. So change the scale factor, or scale it down in game. Let's try to set the scale factor to 0.5 and see how this looks. This looks better to me, and then we can maybe adjust the rest in game, so make it a little bigger than that. I don't want this to be like a big, really big pole. This looks pretty good. And remember, right now, none of these models have actual texture, actual colliders attached, so you can just walk right through. But we are going to add that later. So now we can select the street lamp, go to the first cube and call this street lamp base. Select this one and call this street lamp cover. And I can see I'm missing a T here, so correct that. And then select the cube 001. And actually, that's the street lamp cover. So we'll change this to street lamp glass, and then have the cube 001 be a street lamp cover. So select the base and change the color to completely white. Drag on the street lamp diffuse. Select the cover. Change it to completely white, drag on the street lamp cover and the street lamp glass, completely white, and drag on the according texture. So now we should see a nice looking lamp here. Of course, you can always go ahead and play around with the settings. For example, I recommend that under the street lamp glass, you change this from diffuse to something like unlit, to make it look like it's actually glowing, or maybe even self-illuminated diffuse. That looks even better to me. So that's really how this should look. Then let's go ahead and maybe add a light to this. So you can go into Unity and add a Unity light. So go under game object, create other, and then point light, drag it under our glass, and then zero out the position. So now it should snap to the glass. It doesn't snap exactly, so let's move it over a bit to make sure it's inside. And you can see the light coming onto the ground. We'll change the color of the light to something a little bit more yellow, just a tint. And yeah, this looks good. Maybe change the radius, bump that up a bit, and then the intensity a bit down, so that's something like 0.5. And now when we go in game, because we have let the slider be, we can make this night and see how it lights things up. I think that looks pretty cool. I'll actually go ahead and bump up the intensity even more. So stop playing and select, and then set it back to 1 maybe. So when we go to nightfall, yeah, it really lights things up. This looks good. And of course you can add the halo effect and such, which I showed in the tutorial showing how to make lamps glow. So apply some of the different techniques. This is really about playing around with things and making it how you want it to be. And all of these models are, feel free to use them both commercially and non-commercially. So that means in any way. So let's rename this to street lamp light. And collapse that and collapse that. Let's make a new folder, call this street lamp, and drag on the street lamp cover, yeah, all the textures, and drag them on there. Sweet. Now let's go back into the start area and see if there's any more we would like to implement right now. Maybe we should have a look at the fence. So here we can go under the blend file, and you can see that there are many different ones. So let's just rename this to Blender actually. And you can see that we both have the ordinary fence, so this is a straight one, and we also have different curvy fences, so that if you would like the fence to follow a road, you could use these. So there are large curves and slight curves to either side. And for now I'm just gonna use the ordinary fence, or what, let's see. Actually, we might try with some curvy ones to follow this around. No, we'll just go with the ordinary fence. So let's open it up to see how it looks. And I can see the texture is acting a little weird, but you get the idea. So let's drag this into Unity. And then go back to the fence texture here. So let's just rename this to fence diffuse, and all these renaming and stuff will probably already be done when you get the pack. So just drag that in too. And we can see that this is working. So select the fence, go under rig, none, apply, animation, uncheck import animation, apply, and now you can drag this in, hit F to focus on it. And this is just a single game object. So go under the fences material, make this completely white, and then drag in the fence diffuse, and we can see that this is looking really nice. So, and this is also made so that it tiles perfectly, which means that if you want like a really long fence, you can just go ahead and duplicate it by hitting Ctrl D or Command D if you're on a Mac, and then just dragging it over, holding the Control key to make it snap. And so we can just do this out in infinity so that it will tile nicely. And there might be some problems with the lighting, but it shouldn't be something that's really noticeable. So yeah, that's it. And you can of course always open this up in Blender and make it snap yourself and make it into one object, because that is a little more efficient when it comes to not being too harsh on the computer. So it's really easier for Unity to calculate one object instead of a row of them, even though it's exactly the same result. So you could go ahead and do that, but to make it easy, we're just gonna go with this solution for now. So let's drag this over and maybe rotate it a bit, and so we can have it sitting there. And right now I'm just trying to get all the assets down on the terrain to scale them properly and get all of the textures in there and the properties set. And so we can later on start making a new looking terrain, and I'll probably time lapse that and talk a bit about how I would design the level and how these should be used. So let's go ahead and make a folder for these called fence. Actually, let's just make this fences so we can have all of the other fences in there too. And so, and let's go ahead and hit play. Oops, that was in the scene view. It's in the game view. Hit play. Walk over to it. And this is maybe a bit small. No, that's fine. Let's just leave it there. The rest of the models are not some I'm gonna be implementing right now. They are really nice though. We have some, we have a boat, and we have, it's not there right now, but I should also import the bridge. We have a really nice looking Chinese bridge. So that will all be implemented once we get the water setup, so the river that will run across. So I think in the next video what I'll be doing is I'm gonna be time-lapsing me creating some terrain and talking over how I went about it, and then I'm gonna slow down the parts where I import the assets so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. So cool, now let's just get on with this tutorial. So let's add some colliders. So I'll save this. And the fire for the fireplace is something we're also going to be creating in a upcoming tutorial. So we have a lot of tutorials coming up on the visual side. Now, let's select the street lamp and add a collider for this. So let's just, I don't know how detailed we want this to be. Let's see if we can reach the actual lamp. Okay, we can jump up there. So let's make a series of colliders that will make sure we can't collide with it. And to know more about how we could add colliders to this, you can watch our tutorial on mastering collision. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit game object, create empty. And let's call this street lamp colliders. Plural, and drag that under the street lamp, and let's center out the position so it should be based right down here. And now let's add some more empty game objects. So create empty and drag it under there, and street lamp collider 01 and so on, so you can just make a lot of colliders there. So let's make this a box collider and drag it over and scale it up. And so you get the idea. So this is really just about fitting the model as good as you can without exaggerating like little detail that's really not necessary. And it's also something that will make it harder for the computer to calculate. So really more detail than this is not needed. So let's make it longer like that, and maybe a little bigger to fit the base here. So let's make it a little wider there, and that's actually looking good. So let's go ahead and duplicate that, rename this to 02 and scale this differently so we can have it moved up a bit. And for example, here I'm not going to make the one that goes across. Instead, I'm just going to make one big collider that will take care of this entire part right here. So like that. And then make it a bit smaller on that side. So that will take care of most of the collision here. So if we just drag this down a bit, move it over like that. And then maybe, yeah, let's go ahead and make a separate collider for the lamp too. And then hit the add component. Oh, yeah, it's already there. So we can just scale it down, move it over down to the lamp. And I think it fits nicely. So now let's try and hit play. Run over to the post here so you can see that it really collides nicely, so I can't jump up there. At least it stops me from doing it. And yeah, that's detailed enough for me. You can always go ahead and fiddle around with it even more. And if you really want the collision to be 100% perfect, which I really do not recommend, is then you can add a component under physics called mesh collider, which will simply make a collider that follows the mesh, so the graphics. But again, that is very taxing, and so now I'll just quickly speed the video up here. So I'll just leave you a bit while I make the colliders for the other models. So see you in a sec. Alright, so I'm back and I hope you enjoyed the little sped up footage part there. So this is what I got working. So if we click on the fence, you can see I've just attached a box collider directly and it looks pretty nice. If we look over on the street lamp, you got that already. So the tent rig, I haven't attached any colliders here since we're going to be messing around with cloth physics. And so we're going to need a more advanced collider structure there. So we'll just leave that be. And under the campfire, we have a large box collider and then a smaller one down here for the base. And so when we hit play now, you should see some pretty nice collision going on there. And for the fence. And for the lamp. And so that is pretty much it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. And hopefully it wasn't too repetitive. And in the next one, we are probably going to be taking a look at expanding the terrain and making use of these. So we're going to get creative with that. So that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you in the next one.